here. And to have those positions be very accessible in one place. But then we always run up into the problem of we have, a housing shortage here. And so at least it opens the conversation to thinking about, what inventory exists and which farms do have access to or the ability to house employees or at least have resources and connections to nearby housing, and which don't. And then, maybe we could fill some gaps in between. But this is rather than a housing policy bill, this is more just sort of a statement of what exists and, having more public awareness of that for both Vermonters, but also people outside of the state who might want to, develop more roots here and have an interest in agriculture. That's a start.
If I could perhaps prompt you to talk about the sort of farms with social media presence.
Absolutely. So one way this bill was inspired was through a tour that the Speaker of the House took with Bobby Feliz Rubio in Barnet, and it's called Small Axe Farm. And this farm is, well known for its ability to do really cool regenerative agriculture on a very small piece of land. And so it's gained some rapport through its ability to promote, and advertise through social media, this particular farm, because for whatever reason, they have the capacity to do so. I haven't looked up their social media presence myself, but I've heard that it's good. And that's been one of the ways that they've achieved recruitment of employees there. And so they're okay when it comes to staffing. And I know there's a bunch of other factors that play into that in terms of a farm's budget and everything else. But in terms of putting the word out there and, getting people excited about joining team, they're good at that. But of course, not every farm has that capacity. So for those that don't, and you don't need a marketing degree, or you shouldn't need a marketing degree to be a farmer, basically. So this, takes away one layer of work from the farmer, but also, excites people from elsewhere outside of the state.
Do we know anything about how many farms have housing that they're able to make available to farm workers?
Yeah, so the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board did a study in 2022, I believe, of what exists for our inventory of on-farm housing. And I'm sure some of those properties would be listed, if this were to come to fruition on there. But it's a tricky, intersection, and we can do what we want with this. But, do we want to talk about on-farm housing policy through this, or do we just want to, like, which area do we really want to dive into? And I think personally, this has sparked a lot of research on my end about what exists and what barriers exist. And I've, started having conversations with different groups about that. But, I see this as related, but perhaps separate.
Yeah.
Would this include volunteer positions in addition to wage earners and perhaps salary positions?
I think that's totally up to us as a committee. And both are important. It's just, a matter of, who's willing to do the volunteer work and who are we, trying to recruit. I know part of this was trying to recruit like young people to do the ag work for money, because not everybody can do it for free. But yes, I mean, all the opportunities that exist and ways that we can support farmers would be great.
Funny.
So will a farm have to do this, look for employees?
In my personal opinion, because again, this bill will be shaped by our, democratic decision here. I don't think a farm should have to be included. I think it should be a voluntary agreement, and if this is helpful to them as a resource, then absolutely they should use it. If they see it as not helpful for whatever reason, then no. But that's just my personal opinion, and we can talk about that.
Oh, housing can be part of the compensation of the employee.
Well, see, this is the,
Provide housing and then pay $20 an hour. I guess that's fair.
yeah.
There are examples of that now, where housing is included.
Would you repeat the
Are
question?
there examples of that now where housing is included?
In a wage for someone who's working on a farm?
Compensation,
As
yeah.
compensation, yeah. I mean, and I've had conversations with Mike a little bit about the woofing program as a model. And there are certain ways, and maybe Mike can speak to this better, that we don't want to, tie ourselves or brand ourselves as the same thing as that because Mike, do you want to go into perhaps?
Sure, I don't think I'm saying something new for a lot of people, but programs like that, I think there's some sort of concern with the people who can take advantage of them, right? People who can go spend months not earning a wage and people who don't have the luxury of being able to accept such a position. So, I mean, I wouldn't be necessarily opposed to excluding any kind of package around compensation. I think what's important is that there's really clear sort of visibility and
Absolutely.
clarity around what a certain farm is offering. And you can go to this board and see, this is this opportunity, this is the kind of farm work I'll be doing, the kind of farm practice I'll be learning. These are the things included: housing, compensation, housing, not compensation, housing, and meals, whatever it is. It's just sort of like really easy to go and see.
Well, I just wanna be clarified because take, for example, if I was wanting to hire some kid to help me, hey, I don't have to buy a house, because then I couldn't do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thought to piggyback off of that is, perhaps so in this language, it says that on the directory, there would be a requirement to provide employees with affordable housing. And I don't know if we want to mess with that a little bit and say, we could list the diversity of options, those with and those without, just rather than, excluding all the other on-farm opportunities that don't have it, even, because right now, as it stands, unfortunately, we need to work on our on-farm housing base and just housing base in general. So I would be far more open to having everyone included.
Jed has had his hand up for, Jed.
Thank you. This really, I'm thinking focusing on the housing portion of this registry. I really see the value in the registry, but they're having had some minimal experience in the hospitality business. They would have a 1-star rating, which was pretty modest, or 2-star, 3-star. But I think if transparency and matters, I think there's a whole range, as we've seen, of what on-farm housing may be offered. And with just being an observer of our world, if you came seeking asylum across the border, got up here, your expectation for housing might be different than if someone was moving from some other part of New England, or just an observation. So I think a registry should be fairly clear, whether it's about wage, the nature of the job expectations, and the housing portion. I'm not suggesting a rating system. It should be pretty clear.
I just think we need to be careful about housing with no wage, because then
Right.
you're sort of beholden and you're
Easy exploited.
to totally be exploited. And, there's an apple orchard in my district that they bring in I forget the visa, EB, not the
H2A.
Yeah, they bring in 2 guys from Jamaica and they pay them $18 an hour and they get free housing. And it's really nice housing.
Right.
And I think in a perfect world, that's the model we should be aiming for. Because other farms, some of the dairy farms in my area have some pretty substandard housing. And that's not typical of everybody, but people are kind of trapped there because they, they're not citizens yet and they're working on that and they're easy targets to get trapped. So I just want to make sure that, it's in here, but I think we should really think about, is the housing safe? Is the housing good? And if someone's offering on-farm housing, what mechanism do we have to inspect that housing to make sure it is actually habitable?
Yeah, perhaps to speak on that too, I think the fact that this would provide a little bit more transparency about what people are suggesting are housing options listed right on the website where it's very easy to find, I think whoever would be the party responsible for doing those inspections, obviously they would know where to go to see, what housing stock needs to be assessed for those that, declare that as an option or an incentive for people. But-
Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I would say it's fairly clear in this bill, though, that any of the housing provided would have to be
Yeah.
for human habitation under certain guidelines already existing for.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it seems fairly clear that.
on the third page,
Mhm.
yeah.
And you have to assume that someone who registers a job and housing on this site is going to be someone who has habitable housing, or they know they're going to get inspected. So we have to sort of take a leap of faith that everyone has the best intentions at heart. And I think maybe I'm being naive, but I think this is a really interesting bill.
Well, no leap of faith necessary, perhaps, because it's just, regulated, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah, if they're going to put it out there that they have housing, obviously to comply by the law, like this law. And, those inspections need to happen.
Right.
So the bill as written, as drafted, right, says that this is specifically for farms that are providing.
Exactly, yeah.
If we were to, in committee work, decide that we wanted it to be broader than that, I think it would be sort of important to hear from folks who are already doing lists like this and really define like what would be different about requiring this list, because there are obviously like job boards out there.
Mhm.
These kinds of jobs are posted and people can access them. So just sort of like, if it's going to be a broader list of jobs that have housing, some that don't, compensation, housing included in compensation package, housing in addition to compensation, sort of a more broad ag job board, I think it would just be important to understand what sets it apart or why it's necessary separate from the other things that already exist.
Absolutely. Yeah. And perhaps I need a better understanding of, are all on-farm jobs posted on Indeed? Like, is that where we find them? Like, is there a centralized place already? But in my understanding, there is not. And also, I don't know if everything is posted online, and I don't know if people need help posting, but these are all important questions. And help advertising, like this could be, there is a draw, like this idyllic draw again to Vermont to work on a farm, that I think we can hopefully take advantage of by having these, on a separate page than Indeed on a normal job posting list. But we could sell that in a marketable way.
I think there are there's like, I don't know if Vermont has a classified.
Yeah.
But, certainly there's a barrier of access to that of some amount per posting or per farm. And so that perhaps be one way that this was different from existing.
Is there a fee to post it?
I imagine so.
Oh.
I speak for it, but maybe Rodney.
Are we targeting immigrant workers? I
So
don't see any other industry that has to provide housing.
yeah, so actually No, I don't think that we are targeting immigrant workers here because that's, obviously you need to have H2A in order to have that particular population that I think you're referring to, which H2A, no matter what, you do need housing pretty much. So, that's already kind of spoken for. This is more for like folks who, like, we want to recruit more young, like perhaps immigrants, but perhaps anywhere, like just, anyone interested in farming or perhaps a student at, one of the Vermont State colleges who would otherwise leave for the summer, but there's this cool opportunity and maybe they could find a place to live and, gain more roots in Vermont while they're working over the summer on a farm. But no, I don't think this bill, the intent behind it was directed at, immigrant populations.
Just a second, I just want to be sure that I understand the bill is written anyway, is introduced. Is only saying if you are a farmer with housing available, here's a way for you to, another way perhaps to make that information available to potential job applicants. And it doesn't it doesn't require a farm to offer housing or to do anything differently than it's currently doing. Is that right?
Yeah. So, in theory, we can all decide what the goal is that we want to achieve through the language here. But I think in theory, it's just supposed to be another resource for farmers that's, free and accessible to them technically to advertise where they don't have the capacity on their own to do so. And perhaps it will reach a broader audience than some of the current ways that we have to advertise do.
So some of these questions invoke regulatory issues, right? Like how good is the housing? How safe is the housing? How safe is the employment? Are you being paid a correct wage? Perhaps there's another alternative than to bring in regulatory bodies, but actually having a review process, kind of like Airbnb. Like, oh yeah, I stayed at that Airbnb. I thought it was 3-star. Perhaps there could be a feedback mechanism which naturally filters out the bad players. It's kind of nuanced, but just an idea.
Similar to that, but not quite. There are additional certifications that farms have gone through. Say if you are certified real organic as a farm, they send an inspector to your house to make sure that the housing you're providing for farm workers is actually adequate based on what they deem to be appropriate standards. So there are mechanisms in place if your farm is going to some steps to want to demonstrate that housing is something they offer and adequate housing is something they offer. And our farm, for example, is real organic certified, and the inspector had to go. That was a really unique experience, but I thought that was really neat because it looked at the farm worker as this whole person deserving of an adequate living space. So something to maybe think about.
It could be job creating. There could be a slew
Certainly.
of state inspectors who review and no, seriously, maybe paid for by the surface.
Though I think to bounce off that, I think rather than job creating, hopefully this is a mechanism to job fill.
Yes.
Because I think that's the real problem that we're dealing with here. And it's interesting that this has sparked discussion on like regulation of farm housing, because even though that is so very important, technically without this bill even existing, that should be, a discussion as is.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just, yeah, so this is kind of, I don't want to say separate, but I think we just really need to solidify what gaps we want to fill and like intent and narrow down the best way to achieve it.
The other immediate comments or questions?
I just think that farms that offer housing are going to have a clear advantage. And I think that,
absolutely.
yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Is this seasonal or permanent?
I would say that it could be both, right? I think it could be all opportunities, but it's up to us again. But that's, seasonal housing is another, there are farms who, if we were only allowed to post full-time positions, they would not qualify because some of their housing stock it's livable and it's fine and great, but it's not, insulated or whatever in the way that year-round housing. So I think we would expand the housing stock if we would qualify, seasonal properties.
This is relevant to this discussion. I'm going back using my memory. Testimony we received about farm housing. Some farm workers were married or had a partner and had children. And I recall testimony where they were in a collective, it may have been a trailer or a shed that was converted, and there was a common bathroom, but there weren't clear separations. So some of those there was a little bit disturbing imagery about safety and privacy. So when we get into this, not that this is a undeal withable rabbit hole, but if we're endorsing a certain thing and then it becomes, less than ideal or less than safe. Do you recall some testimony?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I've had further discussions with different groups who are kind of investigating certain scenarios relating to that. But I also think, even though it's kind of sounds horrible, like all the better, just to like have it out there. If we're saying we're offering housing, then how adequate is it? So it's just gonna hopefully be more transparent. And then again, not everyone will feel like they want to post housing opportunities if they have, certain issues with standards like that. But then again, the folks who do have it will win. And that's great. But then again, we go back to the reason why don't we have adequate housing? So that's another policy issue. And, it's caused me to look further into the VHCB on-farm housing, grant that's sort of allocated to repairing homes, or not homes, but, quasi properties that are on farmland. And it just seems like there's not much funding to fix these guys, and it's not happening with speed, and there's zoning regulations that are getting in the way, but that's a whole nother discussion. But we need to be transparent.
I was just texting my friend who is a farmer and used to house people on her farm. And she says the places she posts jobs are beginningfarmers.org, NOFA, Good Food Jobs, and Indeed. And then she said that they can't house any farm workers here on their farm because farm worker housing requirements have gotten pretty strict. And she used to have 2 tiny houses. And apparently because it didn't have fully running water, that's why they couldn't, it didn't officially, it wasn't sanctioned, it wasn't up to code. So it does seem like there are, and these are really nice people, and they're just, because you used to have internships and whatever, and now they don't do it. But it does seem like the rules, she said, have gotten much more stringent about what you can, what qualifies as safe farm worker housing, which is great.
Yeah.
So it seems like the rules have gotten better in the farm workers' favor.
Really need to think about immigrant reform. Because a lot of the farms that have workers that are not getting good housing is the reason, because they're undocumented. And if you make that farm all of a sudden start putting new buildings up, they're gonna be a target.
Oof, yeah.
And H2A program, one of the problems with H2A program, it's only a 10-month visa. So you can only have them for 10 months.
Yeah.
Maximum. So what's the farmer do after that? Can't shut the lights off in the barn for 2 months. So we gotta be really careful how you proceed with this. Not that I'm endorsing this type of activity, but
That type of activity.
I don't want to be responsible for shutting down a bunch of farms.
Well, John, go ahead.
I just wondered, does on-farm housing differ in state statute than other housing? You know, I'm thinking of a situation where I come work on a farm, get housing with it, then I get a better job somewhere else. So the landlord and tenant relationship, you know, can the farm say like, you don't work on the farm anymore, that's part of this relationship? And I want somebody to come in who does do that. And so I just wondered about
Oh, yeah, so.
those situations.
Yeah, so I think we'd need some ledge council wisdom on this. But yeah, so technically this registry is only providing information. Again, so, but then again, there are implications to that information and you know, whatever agreement on whether it's a like job basis, and if that's agreement is different for the job being tied to housing per, you know, job. And I don't think, you know, I don't know what kind of legislative discretion we have over that. But I know, you know, that's an issue across the board in all sorts of industries, like where employment is tied to health insurance, housing, like so many things. So, yeah, so I don't know. That would be more like a ripple effect of like just putting it out there, like what jobs are advertising housing. But more to think about for sure.
That's sort of a unique industry, and I'm talking about other industries that are tied, that have housing that potentially comes with a job or that relationship.
Well, I'm wondering about travel nurses, perhaps, you know, as one industry.
Hospitality.
Hospitality.
Mountains. I think actually a growing number of industries.
Yeah.
As a byproduct of the housing crisis, employers are starting to engage in those relationships more.
Yeah.
Whether that's a good thing or not.
So yeah, I think we have some models to work from there, but there is a history and a track record, especially in the agricultural industry, of exploiting folks, not only because it's tied to housing, but it's because it's tied to your immigration status. And so that's another whole, you know, worms too, but we might have some models to work for to make sure people are protected and their rights are protected while just trying to provide another opportunity. Yeah.
We can thank you, Esme, for introducing the bill and leading the discussion. And why don't we stop for the day? Stop there. I know we've got actually quite a few other bills that we're going to try and give, since we don't have so many that we can't really give everybody a chance to come in and just introduce them, and try and do that in a way that's not overwhelming to the committee, but do it in a fairly rapid way over the next 2 weeks or whatever it might be. And then my thought was we can collectively have a conversation about which bills we want to prioritize and